Health outcomes. Changes due to interventions. To bring positive change, patient experiences and health must both improve. Healthcare costs must be lowered, and clinician and staff burnout has to end. But our problems are big. 133 million Americans have at least one chronic disease. 500,000 people are dying every year from hospital errors, injuries, and infection. The shortage of primary care professionals will be as much as 100,000 in just the next 5 years. Big problems require bigger solutions. Positive change needs acceleration. It needs to happen now. But these are not so easy solutions that many don't want to hear, and even fewer are willing to talk about. How to lead such a change? How to discover, discuss, and disrupt healthcare to make a difference now? This is VITALS, Visionary Health Leadership in Action.
Good afternoon and welcome to VITALS. I'm Dr. John Langell, the president of Northeast Ohio Medical University. We're pleased to bring you VITALS in collaboration with university hospitals. VITALS is an open forum to hear from today's national leaders who are transforming the healthcare landscape using the VITALS tools: value, innovation, technology, advocacy, leadership, and service. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Matthew Anderson as our VITALS speaker. Dr. Anderson is co-director of the Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center, a partnership between the University of Oxford in England and the Harrington Discovery Institute at University Hospitals of Cleveland, aimed at driving cutting-edge rare disease breakthroughs. Dr. Anderson brings a wealth of scientific and clinical research and translational medicine experiences to his role from a distinguished career in academia and industry. Please welcome Dr. Matthew Anderson to VITALS.
Thank you so much for joining. This is an exciting opportunity for us to share the work we're doing here at the Harrington Discovery Institute and the Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center. So just to give you a little bit of background on who I am and a little bit about our program, I joined this program about a year ago now, having been for maybe 10 years working in Boston at Harvard Medical School and one of the affiliate hospitals, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, doing biomedical research and some clinical work as well. I spent 2 years then working in pharma at Regeneron, leading the neuroscience therapeutic program, which actually had a lot of genetic disorders using some of these modern therapeutic strategies that are just emerging that I'll tell you much more about. I then decided that I missed the academic setting and have found this unique opportunity here in Cleveland to do both drug development and also get back to the clinical and have my own laboratory. So that's me. Thank you so much for joining. Looking forward to this talk. Let me just share my slides now. So today I'll talk to you about this relatively new and exciting program that we're doing here at the Harrington Discovery Institute in collaboration with our colleagues at Oxford University. We've united to achieve a mission of delivering cures for rare disease. Why rare disease? Well, they're amazingly common. There are thought to be as many as 10,000 or more rare diseases out there, but fewer than 5% have a treatment, and even fewer have a cure. 500 million people are thought worldwide to be afflicted by a rare disease. Many are children, but not all are. There are many adults also with often genetically driven disease, which really make up the majority of these rare diseases. And certainly some of them are quite severe and cause premature loss of life. So really, now is the moment to develop therapeutics for this major unmet need. It's really the right time. This is, I would argue, the right partnership. And I'll tell you quite a bit about the strategy that we're using. Um, so possibly, 5 to 10 years ago, we had the first human genome. Well, now the cost has dramatically reduced to probably less than a few $100s to have your whole genome sequenced. And even more recently, we have techniques such as AI-driven analyses to really understand what the genetic mutations mean. And importantly, it's also the right time because we have a whole range of completely new gene-targeted therapeutic approaches, which I may touch on a bit more later. Both the Harrington and Oxford are kind of at the frontier of drug development. Harrington having this unique model, which I'll tell you a bit about, and Oxford has a long-standing effort in rare disease therapeutics. This is one of the reasons that this is really an ideal partnership. And the goal really is to unite scientists, clinicians, innovators, investors, and families all in this mission. We have excitedly inspired partnerships with David Cameron, former Prime Minister of the UK, who was really had the forethought to do Genomics England, which is to sequence a large population in the UK. And this has been critical data, in fact, for many pharmas now to identify therapeutic targets. One of which was Regeneron, where I spent some of my time working in pharma. How is this the right strategy? Well, these genetic diseases are getting identified at an increasing incidence with the use of genomics in diagnostic work and clinic. And as I said, the therapeutic approaches to these rare diseases are evolving. Essentially, the strategy is how do you take something from the biomedical research laboratory all the way to drugs in clinic. It's a long road that this program aims to achieve. So that's actually shown here. Let me walk you through the approach of the Harrington Discovery Institute, which is now also largely, done for these rare diseases in the Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center. What I learned from my experience in pharma is that it's quite hard to find the deep, extensive expertise and knowledge and know-how that you find in focused scientific research programs in academic medicine. And in fact, with our program, we make a call for the best projects across the UK, US, and Canada every year in the rare disease realm. The year before last, we had about 95 applicants. This year, we had 150, so it's growing in number. And at the moment, we have the funds to support about 10 projects. So we picked the best 10 projects from across those sources with very rigorous assessment by a variety of experts in both biomedical research and in pharma. Then we surround those scholars. They don't have to leave the academic setting. They can continue to do their work in the normal setting where they've been tremendously successful. And we bring to them the drug development expertise that really they need to move things forward to be ready for a therapeutic. We also have business development capabilities, which really can't be found, is seldom found in the setting of either academics and even in pharma, in fact. So this is a unique model. It's a nonprofit pharma approach. And how do we advance it? Well, we set key milestones using project managers, which is a standard approach in pharma, to have a project manager that really creates a timeline and milestones that must be achieved. And they also help solve problems and obstacles. And also, they're partnered with experts that are specifically chosen from the large consultancy of the Harrington Discovery Institute's program that really meet the unique needs of that particular project, whether it's small molecule, delivery, toxicity, or it's more in the genetic or genetic medicine realm, like nucleic acid or viral vectors, or even techniques like CRISPR. And then the other thing that's really important is to consider how does pharma commercialize these? Because until you can make them somewhat commercializable, it's hard to really deliver them to the larger population. This is a kind of a unique challenge for the rare diseases, and we're thinking of unique strategies to achieve our mission for not only the more common rare diseases, but also for even the ultra rare disorders. And I'll just mention at this point the way pharma, at least Regeneron and some of the other genetics oriented pharma companies, they also look at each of these rare genetic hits as hitting a pathway that would underlie common forms of the same disease. For example, Alzheimer's disease. Well, there are genetic forms that are early onset that are due to mutations in a specific pathway. Those, in fact, are believed to have utility also in the other forms of Alzheimer's that don't have a genetic driver. So we're really trying to take promising discoveries all the way to new medicines in clinic. So this is really the valley of death that is kind of well known in the biomedical world. How do you get your discovery into a patient? And that's really ultimately the goal of everybody doing biomedical research. So this is really shows the global reach of this model highlighted there in next to Lake Erie, the Harrington Discovery Institute, and the Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center, which is partnered, of course, across the Atlantic with University of Oxford. But then you can see all these dotted lines reaching out across the US to all sorts of places, including Atlanta, Florida, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, California. So, we find the best science no matter where it is. There's a few reaching into Canada. You can see there, Toronto, I think, is marked, and then multiple programs in the UK. So the model is let's find the best science and great collaborators that are in their setting with the expertise and with fully developed teams and assays and measurements and a very promising therapeutic agent that's in development. We've actually reviewed about 5,000 plus applications in this process. We have at the moment 227 medicines in the making. This has led to about 46 new companies and 24 clinical trials, and 15 of these things have made it all the way to a pharma license, which is really the goal. Our cure priorities at the moment, we can't do absolutely everything, but we do open this up because you never know what might come in the door. We can't predict everything. We do have a little bit of an emphasis on neurologic disorders, metabolic and developmental disorders, and cancer. But we also know that there are respiratory diseases and various other organ systems that have rare disorders that need to be addressed. And we also assess all those. So we bring in everything. So again, just to sort of reiterate this, we source and select breakthroughs in biomedical laboratories that have the capacity to make a difference for severely disabling and or life-threatening disease. We develop and de-risk these through this customized therapeutic development team with milestones and milestone-based further investments as appropriate and as needed. And then ultimately, we're moving things to clinic through mission-aligned partnerships. Again, this is where the business aspect really comes into play. We need to find companies. We do that from within the Harrington that want to partner on epilepsy, on a certain kind of cancer. And then what we're trying to do is really nurture these all the way to a commercialization platform that would allow us to treat many individuals with these diseases. So again, we're accelerating cures through a novel process and strategy. So here's an example of something that we've recently been trying to fundraise around. There's a pontine glioma, that diffuse infiltrating pontine glioma that really has no therapeutics at all. It's really a horrendous tumor that arises in the brainstem of children. We are trying to fundraise around that, and concurrently from the same donor, autism, which afflicts a large number of people. And while it sounds like a common disease, in fact, as geneticists have been investigating cohorts with autism, they've uncovered a wide variety of genetic disorders, all giving rise to the same classification of autism. The same would be found true if you thought about epilepsy. There are many genetic forms of epilepsy in addition to some where we don't yet have the cause understood. We filter those through, we pull in scholars, and then we have project management, drug development, and business development surrounding this goal. And then the ultimate effort is to achieve patient cures. What is the structure of this virtual pharma? Well, we have experts in medicinal chemistry, formulation, PK/PD and toxicology, business development, commercial strategy, therapeutic modality specialists, like I mentioned, small molecules, nucleic acid, genetic medicines. There's preclinical and clinical planning that all are absolutely critical in thinking about, is there a need? Is that a practical therapeutic strategy? And then there's translational and regulatory. So these are all things that you find in a highly productive pharmaceutical company like a Regeneron. Well, a version of this has been reconstituted in this nonprofit pharma model. And we have pharma executives from all the major companies, as you can see on the right. It's amazing the expertise that has been pulled in to achieve this goal. And everybody that partners with these laboratories finds this tremendously inspiring and motivating as a sort of a next phase of their career, often kind of towards the end, but sometimes quite early. Here's the success that we've had so far. We have a large number of preclinical programs. As you can see here, just you'll see most everything. You can see encephalopathy, asthma, going from the bottom up, epilepsy, again, Alzheimer's, COVID-19, inflammatory bowel disease, retinitis pigmentosa, depression. So, we have a broad capture. Others have moved on to phase 2, spina bifida. Interestingly, that's kind of hybrid to a surgical approach. Sickle cell anemia, again, COVID-19. And then we have more stuff in Alzheimer's and Stargardt's condition and cancer. So you can see there's a wide range of conditions that people need help in their drug development that we've taken on. And then here's the examples of the scholars that we're currently sponsoring. You'll see the 2024 and the 2025 cohorts each have 10 individuals. At least in the 2024, we have 4 oncology and 5 neuroscience and 1 respiratory. And you can see they come in from a wide range of locations: North Carolina, UNC, Duke, Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, Tufts, Toronto, Boston, University of Oxford, NYU, UCL, and Institute of Cancer Research. So, you can see a very diverse set of institutions with a fairly diverse, although somewhat enriched for oncology and neuroscience in this first cohort. And then in the 2025 cohort, you can see, again, quite a few neuroscience programs, but metabolic, oncology, and respiratory as well. And again, coming from across the US, UK, and Canada. These are just tremendous leaders in their own fields within each of these institutions, and these are great partners for us to work with. And sometimes some of the solutions that they find within their own project has utility crossing projects, and Harrington has sometimes been able to help in that respect as well. So here's one of the examples that I wanted to just show you. It's a genetically determined encephalopathy. It's an enzyme, HPDL encephalopathy. It's an enzyme that's impaired, ultra rare, that causes a fatal mitochondrial disorder, disrupting a metabolic substrate, CoQ10 synthesis. And essentially, they have loss of energy production, which, as you know, the brain probably consumes 20% of your overall energy. So that's one of the areas that really gets hit the first when you have a energy production problem. And this expert at NYU, Michael Packold, is a expert in synthetic pathways, and he realized that there is a substrate that you could feed into this pathway that is much more penetrant into the brain than CoQ10, which some of you may realize, you can buy off the shelf in a drugstore without a prescription. It was known that this would be helpful, but they couldn't get it into the brain at a high enough dose, and some of this was overcome by understanding the pathways that he could feed into. And I'm just going to show you an example of the amazing efficacy he showed. So this is an individual here, you can see with a severe ataxia, having difficulty even walking, unable to run, of course. And here you can see again, another individual before treatment. And then this is after treatment, and you can see now the child can actually run. So this is just an amazing N of one example of a transformative therapeutic efficacy of this therapeutic intervention. There is also the belief that maybe boosting energy, mitochondrial function might have therapeutics in other conditions. Alzheimer's is one example where one of the physician scientists within the HDI, an investigator, Andrew Pieper, has shown that boosting mitochondrial function other ways is helpful in at least preclinical animal models of Alzheimer's. So this is a very promising therapeutic approach, demonstrated robustly and kind of inspired by this one pathway where there was a very specific genetic defect, but now could have a very broad utility. What do the awards look like? Well, there's a guaranteed grant award of $100,000. This is supporting 2 years of help. First year is therapeutic support, and almost always renewed for the second year by these, and the support is from project managers and the pharma experts. They access core facilities and infrastructures that are already kind of in place for oligonucleotide synthesis and screening, small molecule and protein platforms, cell and gene therapeutic facilities. And there is opportunity for increased amounts of money that follow that first 2 years. And ultimately, we would find partners for investments, either to start a company or ultimately, once we get it sufficiently de-risked, possibly licensing it to pharma. So we are just now putting out our call in the next couple of days, and we're looking for proposals that have rigorous science, creativity, and innovation, but most importantly, a potential for clinical impact. You could have an MD or a PhD, researchers in the UK, US, and Canada, but that operate their own laboratory are qualified. The deadline for the application is March 9th, 2026. We do this on a yearly basis, of course, and there's a link for the application. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for that very insightful program. I'm Monica Robbins. I'm the senior health correspondent with WKYC TV. I have a zillion questions for you. The first of which is, we've witnessed in the last year a lot of funding cuts from NIH to medical research. Is that a major concern of yours? And how would that impact Harrington? And I think it's logical to think that thankfully, you also have the UK backing some of that research as well.
We have UK and we have Canada. We do depend somewhat on monies that the laboratories already have, of course. But once a project is very, very mature, some of it could be developed further with CROs and through some of the funds that we're fundraising for. My anticipation is that this is a temporary setback. As time progresses, I think we're going to get a settling of all this in a more fully supported state, because really there is very strong historical support for the NIH and for research. So I think that this is a bit of a setback, and it is challenging. And yet, I think in the long run, it's probably not going to be a persistent challenge. But it is true that one may also have to think of new models for funding research. More of it may have to come from philanthropic, investments. And the fact is, there are a lot of individuals that have resources that, in fact, want to fund something that is near and dear to their heart, that afflicts a family member or is just something that they want to have an impact on. So, part of the development wing, this business side of the Harrington, really aims to find those individuals, and then we partner, the people that want to invest with these people that are experts in developing something that would help their goal. And then what we offer is not, you don't just put your money into that lab alone, but we also help improve the probability that it literally gets to a therapeutic in patients. So I suspect that we may, in fact, get more applications as a result of this.
What are the other biggest hurdles rare disease research has to face in addition to, finding those patients who might be part of clinical trials, I would assume?
So there are challenges. One of the challenges is that large pharma is primarily aimed at common disease, and they have a board that they have to answer to and investors that they have to answer to. So they're really aiming for like high impact therapeutics, right? It is true that it's often a very expensive process, right, to develop a new drug. And in a way, these are neglected by pharma, these rare diseases. So there really does need to be a new model. Actually, this is a reason that the UK and Oxford is a great partner. They have socialized medicine in the UK. And the government looks at each of these as kind of a goal to achieve their mission of good health. And there's no middleman. So in a way, that's why maybe they were better able to do a nationwide genetic analysis. And now they've accomplished that, and they want to treat the things that they have uncovered with that genetic analysis. And they're kind of an inspiration for even the pharma. Like Regeneron had a Regeneron genetics medicine program, and they believe that the next wave of therapeutics are going to come from our insights in understanding genetic pathways that get disrupted to cause human disease. So that's one challenge, but we are thinking of solutions. You can use these pathways to crack open new insights that would have therapeutic utility. I just mentioned one in terms of boosting mitochondrial function for various diseases. You can use these as starting points for new delivery platforms, right? If you have an organ system that's not working properly and you can deliver effectively to it kind of a new therapeutic agent like a nucleic acid and show efficacy in this kind of small but uniform population with a severe disease, you suddenly have cracked open the possibility of treating a whole range of things that impact that organ system. Or you have just cracked open the utility of nucleic acids in hitting their targets. So I think that these are really ideal diseases to kind of forge new therapeutic strategy.
Does Harrington have any therapeutics that have already been discovered to, benefit not just the one disease that they're looking at, but also others?
Yes. Well, so the Harrington Discovery Institute has was really started around the physician scientist model, which are people that sort of wear two hats, right? They're MDs and they're PhDs. I'm one of those people, and they have had great success in finding projects through that avenue preceding this Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center program, and one of them somebody had the insight to people that, before they get a catheterization for heart, an acute heart attack, that there's that window as you're getting transported from your home to the cardiologist that's doing the cath. Can we do something to increase their probability of making it through that window? And they have a new therapeutic agent that is subcutaneously injected en route. And this is, I think, at stage 3, phase 3 clinical trial, which will be, a large number of patients. So I think that that's an example of a broad utility. As you saw, the Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center is a bit more young, right, and earlier. We've only got a couple of years, and it does take quite a few years, right, for these drugs to develop. That's why this program actually, there's been a commitment from UH to have this partnership in place for 10 years. And we have a very ambitious goal of 40 drugs. Now, is that overly ambitious? Well, the other thing that's happening in this rare disease space is because we are using nucleic acids, and nucleic acid therapeutics that target a specific genetic thing can be almost like designed through just knowledge, right? And through thoughtful design. There's a lot of luck, right, in small molecule drug development. You have to do screens, and you can't just simply design something. Well, with nucleic acids, based on the genetics, you know exactly, and in a genetic disease, unlike what I just mentioned in terms of heart attack, that's a complex pathway. Well, if we know a single genetic problem is driving the disease, you know what you have to target. And we have these wonderful genetic medicines now that can do very precise things. So we think that that's going to have a shorter timeline in terms of drug development. But we're still kind of getting our cohort of individuals into the rare disease pipeline.
I was interested to see how many of your scholars were in neuroscience. Is there a reason behind that?
Great observation. One of the reasons is the nucleic acid therapeutics programs are benefiting from what we now know. When you put a nucleic acid in, if you put it in the brain through intrathecal delivery, you can load neurons across the brain, and it'll stay in there for months, and it could be in there a single dosing every 3 to 6 months, actually. But a cell group, population of cells that turn over, like the gut or liver or some other organ systems. First of all, you don't have this nice enclosed compartment, right? So you have the whole vasculature. So really, the brain is uniquely a unique setting in which to do this genetic medicine therapeutics, and that's why there's quite a few therapeutics aimed at that, and some of which have had tremendous success, such as spinal muscular atrophy. It's a very severe childhood illness, and they die. It's just really devastating. That is really one of the major therapeutic breakthroughs, and that was going from a lethal disorder to surviving and being continuously treated, has been transformative for those individuals. That really is largely the inspiration. That's why pharma is embracing this approach, and why others are. If you really look at the genetic medicines landscape, a lot of it is in the liver right now. And that's because they have a way to inject things into the bloodstream, and the liver is a natural filter for that. And they've tagged something that would only go to the liver. It's a little carrying tool. It's a delivery technology. And they've done all sorts of absolutely amazing therapeutic interventions targeting genes like CRISPR and this proteinopathy that is produced by the liver. They clipped it out using CRISPR techniques, and it's worked beautifully. So the liver is a uniquely easily accessible organ system, and at least in the Regeneron environment and many other companies, that's why you're going to just see a plethora of genetic medicines coming around for liver therapeutics. The CNS is kind of the next big wave, I would say.
We keep hearing artificial intelligence. How much of a role is that playing in helping get some of these therapeutics out of the lab and to the bedside? And do these researchers have access to a mega supercomputer, perhaps at Oxford, or there's another one at Cleveland Clinic?
So yes, I mean, people are slowly getting, really beginning to understand what the utility is. We've thought about epilepsy a little bit as an example of a target. It's severe, it can be lethal. It's within the CNS using this pathway I just mentioned. And you can use a large language model to identify every single genetic form of epilepsy. You can ask, what is the mechanism? You can ask, are these drug resistant? What's the patient population? A single individual can create a tremendous knowledge resource, and we're starting to use that ourselves. The other thing is, yes, we are partnering people that have small molecules with various AI technologies that would permit you to understand what the proper binding pocket of a protein might be that you would target. So that is definitely a part of what we're doing. And certainly the whole pipeline that I just described to you, there's talk about creating kind of AI-enabled efficiencies at every step.
I know that, most people probably have never heard of the majority of the 10,000 rare diseases that you're looking at, but I would guess that many of those diseases have some kind of advocacy group behind them. How important are those advocacy groups, and what is your advice to those who, considering funding difficulties now, what can they be doing?
So those are key partners for us. And it's interesting that we've been approached by quite a few groups like that because they don't necessarily always have, well, they don't have a set of pharma experts, typically. And we provide that to them. And we can do a call and we can review all the proposals coming in. And certainly they will have experts as well, but particularly in the realm of does this have or medication feasibility, and that's something that the Harrington uniquely provides. It's absolutely critical because usually these foundations are one of the multiple sources of funding, in addition to the NIH, and it's really critical. And these are the places that individuals that are trying to. Sometimes they're the high net worth individual that starts the program. I'm involved in one of those. And almost the most beautiful example, my PhD work on cystic fibrosis. So the gene for CFTR, called CFTR for cystic fibrosis, was identified, and it was really the nurturing of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation of getting the money, and then awarding things and having regular meetings. They ultimately nurtured that whole program, including every critical step in that particular disease. So we would naturally be a partner with them. And right now, what has happened? Well, we figured out what the gene does. It's an ion channel. We knew what to measure. People did small molecule screens, and amazingly, the mutations, which we sort of showed how they disrupt its function, that was my PhD work. They fix those problems with a small molecule. Absolutely amazing. And children that would have early life expectancy in the teens now go to their 70s. So it was transformative for that field. This was, in fact, one of my own personal inspirations for, taking this approach to what we're doing at the Oxford Harrington Rare Disease Center. But I think that they're absolutely key partners. And I think they're key partners for the Harrington, Oxford Harrington, but also for these laboratories. They need to find these people. And sometimes people that have a mission of their own, focus on a specific disease. Maybe there isn't a foundation yet. Now's the right time to create those things because it's getting easier and easier with AI techniques to build websites, and put together a program like that.
Other than being rare, what other unique challenges do you face for recruiting in a disease clinical trial?
Well, of course, many of them are genetic conditions, and not everybody gets genetic testing. It's kind of surprising. We actually know a lot about the genetics of autism, an amazingly large amount in the biomedical research realm. But this has not, kind of worked its way into the clinics quite yet. I mean, I think it's relatively routine to do CGH arrays, which are, genomic changes, deletions, duplications, things like that. But, whole exome or even whole genome sequencing is not standard of care. And, some of this becomes an issue because of insurance company reimbursements. That's one of the goals that the UK has really almost shown, and they're following that, because if you can do a genetic test and see something before they're symptomatic, it can be the difference between being permanently impaired in your motor function or even worse to being able to walk and even run with spinal muscular atrophy, because those cells actually degenerate, so they're gone. They're not just dysfunctional. So I think that the genetics is currently a roadblock that needs to be solved. And then patients, I'm a part of a ultra rare genetic condition. We're lucky enough to have a family that is devoted to this condition because the grandson has the condition. And this is enabling others to benefit as well, and he's inspired to find a therapy for his grandson. This is going to help his grandson, but it's also going to help all the other individuals that have a genetic form of axonopathy that this condition causes. So I think that there needs to be, this whole emergence of social networking and online, interaction is really going to be the future of a lot of medicine, in my view. And it really is going to require motivated individuals to partner in this effort.
One last question before we hand it back over to Dr. Langell. What is your advice to the Neomed MDs and the PhDs as they move forward, and especially dealing with research?
So one thing that I would say is keep an eye out for potentially genetically determined conditions. It's interesting. I heard a interview of the individual that started Open Evidence. And what that is it's this tremendously valuable. I think many physicians have downloaded this and are using it now. And its profit model is really just the advertisement. And it's absolutely a lifesaver for people that have these huge clinics, whether it's what is the latest therapeutic for cancer, what is, how do I treat this genetic form of melanoma, or, I think that is something that one should use. And I think that making use of the genetic diagnostic services that are available wherever they are, either at your own institution or outside. And those are available. And I think that it can be a lifesaver for a family if they can sort of understand the driver of their disease, because then they can sort of find these foundations to try to get further help.
Dr. Anderson, thank you so much for your insight and your inspiration, actually. So, all right, at this time, we're going to hand it back to Dr. Langell.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Be sure to join us next month when our vital speaker will be Dr. John Cianca, President of the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation.
Health outcomes. Changes due to interventions. To bring positive change, patient experiences and health must both improve. Healthcare costs must be lowered, and clinician and staff burnout has to end. But our problems are big. 133 million Americans have at least one chronic disease. 500,000 people are dying every year from hospital errors, injuries, and infection. The shortage of primary care professionals will be as much as 100,000 in just the next 5 years. Big problems require bigger solutions. Positive change needs acceleration. It needs to happen now. But these are not so easy solutions that many don't want to hear, and even few are willing to talk about. How to lead such a change? How to discover, discuss, and disrupt healthcare to make a difference now? This is VITALS, Visionary Health Leadership in Action.